my life, removing pain. Lord, let my words heal a heart that hurts. I want to spend my life mending broken people. I want to spend my life mending broken people.
Hello and welcome to another 3ABN Today program. I'm Jason Bradley and I'm so excited that you could join us as we're going to get a ministry report on nPraxis International. And here with me to discuss this is Marty Phillips, and he's the president of nPraxis International. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yes, sir. I'm excited to just jump into your background, how everything got started, and find out all about this amazing ministry. But before we do, we're going to go to a song by Stephanie Dawn, and it's entitled, "Oh Glorious Love."
In my darkness, Jesus found me, touched my eyes and made me see, broke sin's chains that long had bound me, gave me life and liberty. Oh, glorious love of Christ, my Lord divine, who gave himself to save a soul like mine. Through all my days and then in heaven above, my song will silence never. I'll worship him forever and praise him for his glorious love. Oh, amazing truth to ponder. He whom angel hosts attend, Lord in heaven, God's Son, what wonder. He became the sinner's friend. Oh, glorious love of Christ, my Lord divine, who gave himself to save a soul like mine. Through all my days and then in heaven above, my song will silence never. I'll worship him forever and praise him for his glorious love, and praise him for his glorious love.
Oh, glorious love. Thank you for that beautiful song, Stephanie Dawn. If you're just joining us, I'm sitting here talking to Marty Phillips, the president of nPraxis International. Marty, I want to go a little bit into your background, your upbringing, prior to diving into what nPraxis International is all about. How were you raised, and where did you grow up?
Yes, good question. Both my parents were in ministry, both here in the U.S. and also abroad. They went overseas as missionaries when we were young.
Okay.
And so I came up with that understanding that I'd be involved in mission. I felt a deep calling to ministry. I went through seminary, but didn't feel a calling to be a traditional church pastor, you might say.
Okay.
So I went through a lot of questioning, what did this mean? How would that turn out to be? Why are you calling me to ministry if I don't feel called to be a church pastor?
Yes.
I also had another burning question. I'm a sixth generation Adventist. Family started in the very first Adventist church that was built in New York.
Wow.
And every generation of my family have said, Jesus is coming this generation. So my big question when I was in school in the seminary and studying theology in the undergraduate level was, Lord, what is it going to take to bring the Gospel Commission to a close? And I went through a long journey over many years, even after school. What did this mean? At first I thought it was maybe getting better organized, but as I looked around, Adventists are pretty organized. Does it mean that we need to live more godly lives? And well, that leads to legalism. So if we're so good, then is that going to bring Jesus? And went through several things, or we can have better projects and programs. And God then started leading me on a journey. No, look for where I am already working. Come on board with what I am doing. And I found a lot of statements like from Ellen White that she says, if we would work where God's already working, we would have 20-fold, 100-fold on different quotes she gives, if we would come alongside what God is already doing. So it's become my life passion to find where is God already working.
Yes.
In our own people group and unreached people groups. And so instead of coming and just starting from ground zero, looking where is God already working in this community.
Gotcha. And that's where you felt your calling.
And that's where I eventually felt my calling, was searching for where God's already working.
Now, what is nPraxis International?
So we're an organization, a supporting organization that works for the Seventh-day Adventist Church under contract. And so we oversee a network of house churches.
Okay.
Mainly across the 1040 window, but also beyond. So we have house churches here in the U.S. from different networks that have joined our network, you can say from Azerbaijan to Brazil. So we actually operate in about 50 countries.
Okay.
So we work mainly, the majority of our ministry is within Muslim countries. We work with Buddhists. We work with indigenous tribal groups. We look for isolated tribes in the middle of jungles. Where can we find these type of people? Or unreached tribes that have been resistant to the gospel. And then more recently with my own people group, Western people, who say, we're not going to enter into a church. So how do we reach those type of people
the traditional brick and mortar?
Exactly. So we reach people who would no longer, our focus is reaching people who would not go into a brick and mortar church.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, you said 1040 window. For those that don't know, what is the 1040 window?
Well, yes, it's basically the area that takes up most of Asia and Africa, which goes through latitude 10 to latitude 40.
Gotcha.
So it's the people group that lives in there, and so the majority of the Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, tribal worlds live in those longitude area.
And there's a lot of closed countries in that window, correct?
There is. There's probably over 50 closed countries. We work in about 28 of those.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty dangerous, isn't it?
Let's say, by God's grace, we have learned to operate in those types of places. I learned, I first worked for ADRA.
Okay.
As I started my career, and I learned a lot about working in high security areas or high tension areas. And then after that, I worked for the General Conference. I was the coordinator for underground house churches in Muslim countries. So we learned a lot more. And eventually then we started a supporting ministry that would support the church.
Wow.
To oversee house churches in closed countries, and then it
Okay.
expanded from there.
Okay. Now, how did the name come about, nPraxis?
Yes,
what
since
is
I
that mean?
belonged, every trade has its lingo.
Okay.
And so in the mission community that are involved in, like, say, cutting edge of mission, there's a term that's called praxis.
Okay.
And it's used to mean when you do mission, you don't just do what you've done all the time. You always are evaluating what you're doing, and it's a special focus on building God's kingdom. It's not just coming in and making people my brand of Christianity, but it's really saying, how can we bring God's kingdom? How can we focus on building kingdom values in this community? And then let's keep reevaluating that process. Is this making sense to the people? Is the gospel actually touching their core, deepest needs?
Gotcha.
And then to make it cute, we put in praxis, in small n, capital P, like there's iPhone
Yep.
and stuff like this, so we put in praxis.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I was wondering how the name came about and what it meant and all of that stuff.
Yes.
Now, you have multiple different facets of your ministry.
Correct.
Why don't you just touch on each facet and tell me a little bit about each?
Our main goal is to plant home fellowships. So we have a network of about 125,000 home fellowships that meet each week.
125,000?
125,000. So most of these are family. We've found the most effective way is for family, grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, kids, uncles and aunties. In more Western contexts, it is friend groups. What we've found the most strategic is friend groups to worship together, or family groups.
Okay, so close-knit.
Close-knit. The closer knit you are, the better your home fellowship functions.
Gotcha.
And the faster they grow.
Gotcha.
Because then what we do is we invite another person who's not exactly our friend group or another family to experience what's happening in our family, and then they go back and replicate it in their friend group or in their family setting.
Okay.
So this is our main focus, whichever people group we're working in. So we work specifically, as I mentioned, with Muslims, with high caste Hindus, mainly Brahmins, with remote tribal groups, and with Westerner people, whether it's U.S. or Finland or Brazil, who would no longer set their foot inside a brick and mortar church. That's our understanding with the Organized Adventist Church. We will work with people who would not come to a brick and mortar church.
Gotcha.
So then we provide services to these people.
Okay.
So then many of the countries, like 28 or so of them, are countries that would be difficult to get Bibles into.
Yes.
So then we find unique ways to get Bibles into those countries.
Nice. Nice.
So those are unique in the same way many operate to get weapons or drugs in and out of countries. Those people who are involved with Bibles use some of those same methods.
Wow.
I mean, it's hard, it's controlled to get into closed countries, but by God's grace, we have gotten tens of thousands of Bibles into closed countries. So that's a big component of our ministry. We're also involved with some Bible translation as well.
See, I just want to say that really blows my mind that, when you think about the Word of God going into a country, that sometimes it has to go in the same way that people get drugs and weapons into a country, that a book that talks about the love of Christ and all of that, you have to, it just blows my mind that people wouldn't want to receive the gospel.
Well, there's countries where it's prohibited, where if people are even caught with the Bible, it can mean certain significant penalties, and some as bad as death, and others imprisonment, others just disinheritment or social problems.
Yes.
So there's varying levels. But what we have found is that the power of the Bible to transform lives in the most, what we would call closed countries, is immense. For example, in one country we have got, I don't know, maybe 130,000 Bibles into it. Wow. And we've probably distributed over 100,000 Bibles already, 110,000. And we give those Bibles to only heads of household who have committed to study the Bible with their families.
Nice.
So we've seen real impact And it's just amazing to see what Bibles will do when properly. So we don't just hand out Bibles willy-nilly, but we have a system through our networks of home fellowships
Yes.
that the Bibles are distributed.
Yes. How is God working in the Middle East and across the Muslim world?
It's really amazing. I would like to kind of pull back this morning the smoke screen of the news. We see all the horrible parts of the news, but I believe that Satan works to put up smoke screens so we don't really see what's actually happening. And what we see, the events that have happened since 9/11 till now have really brought the Muslim world and the Middle East to like this moment in time where they're open, maybe not to become a Christian and accept, well, let me put it in this way, to become what they perceive to be a Christian,
Okay.
to go to a brick and mortar church, but they are open now to question. They're open to rethink their faith.
Okay.
Or they're open to question things that they would have never done 10 or 15 years ago. And so we've just seen like whole countries open up to the gospel.
Wow.
If we had more Bibles, we could continue to provide Bibles to
Yes.
countries and more workers.
Yes.
At this point, it's basically a financial thing to be providing more. But we have just seen people's hearts open up. God has given visions and dreams across the Muslim world. All the time, every few days, weeks, months, there's new stories. And it's interesting, God tends to give visions and dreams to big community leaders, people who have significant influence.
Nice.
And so when someone has a dream or vision who's of significant influence and he shares it with his community, in those countries that are patriarchal countries,
Yes.
it means a lot. So now we'll listen, oh, Dad had it, or the big chief of our tribe had it, or our leader of our religious group has had it.
Yes.
And he has had a vision of what we've found this typical of thing is a man in white. And in their heart, they know that this man dressed in white Arab clothing, his face shining like the sun, they immediately know somehow in their heart that this is Jesus.
Yes.
And he will say, follow me, or he will, that's the traditional thing. We've seen this over and over, and I have one friend that I work with, 30 sometimes he had this dream at night, follow me.
Wow.
Until he finally says, okay, Lord, I follow you.
Wow. Wow. And so when these heads or chiefs catch the vision and they share it with everybody, people get on board because they're so confident in the chief?
Yes. So, for example, I work with a big tribal chief from a Muslim country.
Okay.
And he rules an area about the size of Texas and New Mexico combined. Not everyone in that area belongs to his tribe, but the majority are. And he is pretty much the supreme leader of that area.
Okay.
And his father had many dreams, about 100 dreams and visions about Jesus, about the second coming, about the end time. And he had come, since there was no external missionaries available, he had come to most, you might say, biblical or Adventist beliefs.
Okay. Okay.
And when I came in contact with him, I started working, just their family was a group of believers. And at that time, they were the family of the leadership. I mean, he was the oldest son of the oldest son for like hundreds of years.
Okay.
And so they hadn't had a tribal elder. And they had been kind of ostracized because they had become followers of Jesus. And the tribe had kind of pushed them out. They were in persecution. And I met them in around 2000.
Okay.
And I told these two brothers, you know, God's going to give you back the leadership of your tribe. And they kind of laughed. That's not going to happen. We've been ostracized. We haven't had a big chief in a couple of generations. My grandfather resigned being a chief, and we've never had a big chief. And I says, no, for such a time, God has brought you for this. So by July 2005, their father died. 8,000 tribesmen, you might say, and government officials and stuff came to his funeral.
Wow.
So after the funeral, they said, we need a chief again. So a very close friend of mine, this young man, about my age, that was, some time ago, but he was elected to be the tribal chief.
Wow.
Today he has about 350 sub-chiefs that have pledged allegiance like an old feudal way, you know.
Okay,
You
okay.
come and pledge allegiance to him, you know, almost a knighthood way. And so his house has like 350 of these who have pledged allegiance to his home. He rules this area the size of Texas, New Mexico.
Wow.
And a big portion of his people are reading the Bible and coming into a movement of sharing similar faith as we do as Seventh-day Adventists.
That is incredible. Now, how do you go about cultivating relationships with people all around the world, especially in these closed countries?
Well, that's a good question. As I was mentioning to you previously, one of my big questions was, Lord, how are we going to see the Gospel Commission come to a close? And so as I was searching and praying, the first thing I understood is, as I mentioned, is finding where God's already been working. But then as I started studying the New Testament, how did the early church grow so fast? In 50 years, we find this unbroken chain of believers from Scotland all the way to India. Wow. I mean, it's from India and then across Africa. How did this all happen? So you see this massive movement that emerges in 50 years. And looking at the New Testament, we found this thing that Jesus followed the following: knowing who to share your faith with, 2, knowing what to share once you find the person, then discipling them, then teaching them how to come together to do church, to be a part of a community of believers, and then how to replicate.
Wow.
So the first question is to respond to you of this is, who do you know how to share with, or how do you go about finding people? So the New Testament gives a parable which starts to explain this. It says, the sower went out to seed. Some seed fell on stony ground, some fell on the path, but then some, and etc., and then some fall on good soil, which gives 30, 60, 90, and 100-fold. So how do you find that 90 and 100-fold seed first? And so this is what good missionaries do, is look for where God, the people who are the most receptive. And Jesus tells first the 12 and then the 72, when you go out, when he sends them out, he says, look for the person of peace.
Okay.
And so when you go back and look for the person of peace, what did that mean in Jesus' time? They had different designations, like a merchant was called the son of the road.
Okay.
And they had different like nicknames for different types of trades and people.
Okay.
But there was a tradition which existed among Jews, still exists among Muslims, that they would leave their synagogues or mosques open. And so if you were a traveler and you go to the synagogue to sleep, because they would leave them open for travelers. They didn't have a lot of hotels, and any Jew for hundreds of years could travel from town to town. He arrives to the synagogue, and it's left always open, and he could unroll his pack and sleep there for a night or two and then continue his journey. If you move to a new town, you go first to the synagogue and sleep. And many times there was a person in the town who had the gift of hospitality and generosity. And he comes to the synagogue every night to see if there was a weary traveler. Don't sleep here, brother, you come to my home. And come and stay with me. So then they go stay with him. And usually what it was found, this person not only had the gift of hospitality and generosity, had the gift of peace mediation.
Okay.
So if families in the community got fighting, before they go to the civil authorities, they come to him, and he helps resolve these problems.
Okay.
And we've found that these people today exist as well today. There's people with the group being of spiritual gifts, which include hospitality, generosity, conflict resolution, and they have a strong sense of justice and a strong sense of compassion for the weak. And so they kind of protect. These are people who kind of are glue within a community. And then they have a strong sense of loving their land and loving their people. So then as we started to understand this biblical figure of what happened in the New Testament, understand what it meant in Jesus' time, then how can we apply this today? So then in the mission circles, it's called looking for the person of peace, the man or woman of peace. And to give you an example, My wife works for the division here, the North American division, and she's
Okay.
in charge of the Department for Adventist-Muslim Relations or Muslim Evangelism. And to make a long story short, she went to do a training for the church officially at one of the large division events, and pastors went to different ones, and it was a time when there was a lot of discussion going on about the future of the division, and 90% of the people went there, and each department director has to pay for their part of the building and all this. She paid thousands of dollars, and 5 people came. And so she calls me, hey, should I just go home and not pay this or get out of it? I mean, it's a lot of money because every department has to pay their own, carry their own weight. And so I says, no, God brought you the 5 people, because only 5 people. And out of this, one of them was one of the conference presidents from here. And as my wife was training how to reach out to the Muslim people and to look for a person of peace, he gets all excited about this, because in his community, in his conference, it has probably close to 150,000 Muslims, concentrated about 100,000 of those in one city.
Wow.
And so he goes back to his conference, he gets one of his local pastors who had been a missionary himself, but he pastored what would be a good way, I mean, it was a mixed ethnicity church.
Okay, okay.
And so he had a very mixed, it was black, white, Asian, he had a very, very mixed. And so he comes and shares this vision. Hey, Pastor Tony, this is what I heard about this person of peace, and we really need to reach out to the Muslim population. So then Pastor Tony gets all excited. And so he starts thinking, how am I going to reach the person of peace? And right about that time in their city, Bradshaw he was invited to come have the Union evangelistic campaign.
Okay.
And so then Tony got this idea, I'm going to invite the Muslim community, and I'm going to try to find the person of peace to come and translate. Well, we didn't want...
That's a good idea. Sounds like.
Yeah, so Pastor Tony didn't realize at that time no Muslim would come to a crusade.
Okay.
Or to an evangelist. We don't like to use the word crusade, but for a Muslim, this is a very bad term, and all this terminology, they will never show up.
Okay.
So, but Pastor Tony did think of a good thing. Took him 3 weeks. Any Muslim, no one would dare translate for a Christian evangelistic campaign. But he finally found one person. And the person said, look, if you pay me, I'll go translate. I'll tell you no one will come, but if you pay me, I'll translate. So the man translated there. No one came, but as he was listening to the weekly meetings, he became a follower of Jesus.
Wow, praise the Lord.
And became a baptized Seventh-day Adventist.
Wow.
To make a long story short, he was someone who God had been preparing not just in his lifetime, but for many, many generations. His family were known in his country to have stabilized the country. His great-grandfather, who was still living, was basically the strong man who pulled their whole country together, kept it from falling into total anarchy. And he had been expelled from the family for a long time due to, he'd become an Adventist in our meetings, but before that he had become a Christian, and he'd been totally expelled.
Oh, wow.
But by working with him, he went back, he reestablished his relationship with his family. His great-grandfather recently died, and because his grandfather and father died, he inherited the family throne, you might say.
Okay, okay. So now he's been put in a position of influence.
A significant influence. And he's a the biggest tribal leader, but it's almost like a kingly power. But they have a Western form of government. But I've sat with him while he was changing the Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Oil, the head of the military, talking about which is going to be the new president. So.
Wow.
And just amazing. So that all of a sudden gives him national influence to be able to, and he said, the interesting thing, this is one of the most fanatic countries in the world, and he said he wouldn't take the position unless there was a general consensus of all the sub-elders that would be under him that they knew he was a follower of Christ, and there was almost a unanimous decision.
Wow.
So God does these types of divine encounters, and how he brings little pieces of puzzle. And today I work with probably a half a dozen people that have that type of influence.
Wow.
And they have national influence, and not everyone is that level, but it's just amazing how God, we always prayed, Lord, send us to that 100% seed.
Yes.
That you have been fertilizing for a long time, that's like the Pauls. Paul had been raised to be at the very height of his religious community, and then God leads him, and then because of Paul, we see a massive movement emerge for Christ. So we look for those type of people, like Cornelius. He's a person of peace, clearly in the New Testament in Acts.
That's huge. Yeah, I was wondering, like, what do you look for, and then how do you go about reaching that individual? So do you also kind of determine what their needs are, and like when you're getting to implementing Christ's method? Is that kind of what takes place?
Definitely. So like with this individual I've just mentioned, you know, in his process, he would call me anytime, day or night. What do I do, Marty? And I would encourage him, keep going. Because there was a lot of challenges before he came to power, you might say, and even now, you know, I might receive a phone call at 3 in the morning. So his needs are, I need someone I can talk to all the time.
Yes.
And so that's a lot of my ministry, being an advisor to people like himself who need, what do I do in the next step? For example, I was working with another big tribal elder. And I was sitting in church one Sabbath morning here about 2 years ago, and I feel my phone vibrate. And I'd look, and this gentleman is calling me, also from a close country, also has a lot of political power in his nation. And I step out to go, and he says, Marty, I have 50 tribal elders all telling me I need to declare war.
Wow.
What do I do as a follower of Jesus?
Wow.
And he says, I mean, in his country, he's not the head of state, but he is big enough that a whole section of there might be many small tribal wars. And he had authority from the central government to punish the tribe that had got out of line because his area, the seat of his capital had been invaded by another tribe. And they had burned, they had raped, they had stolen 124 SUVs, burned the bank, stolen the money from 3 banks.
Wow.
And it had been a very, very hostile thing. And so now he has 50 tribal elders saying the only honorable thing for us to do is now go take revenge. And so now what do I do as a follower of Christ? Do I take revenge? Do I punish them? What do I do? I don't want to look weak.
Which, you know, the awesome thing is that he is considering, what do I do as a follower of Christ? So that shows that for his decision-making process, he's thinking about, you know, what would Jesus do, basically, in this situation, which is incredible.
So this is what I just see over and over, what would Jesus say? And just to quickly, I mean, to share what happened, I really have gotten to know their families very in-depthly, and their family history. I found it's important. So he says, Marty, what do I do? And I says, I don't know, but as I was just praying, I remembered a story from his family. His nation had been invaded. About 120 years ago by another nation, not just 2 tribes, but the nation. And his great something grandfather had organized the country. All the big major leaders came to him and said, we will submit to you, and you lead us into battle to protect our country. And he said, but you have to promise to obey me fully. You all have to pledge full allegiance in battle. None of you can break off and do your own thing. So as the day of the battle came, massive battle, it's recorded, it's actually in history, and many people in that region know of this amazing battle that happens. As the Ottoman, which was today Turkey, is the Ottoman Empire, invaded their place, he lined up thousands of his soldiers, but he lined them up behind the forest. And then as the Ottomans were approaching, he says, now we're going to kneel and pray, and we're not going to fight, and none of you will stand up. We will stay on our knees before God and see how God will win this war for us.
Wow.
And as they were praying, the Ottomans soldiers did not want to attack. And they said, how can we attack praying men? Finally, the general said, you will all be court-martialed and executed if you don't attack. So finally, half-heartedly, the soldiers advanced against praying men. And then God did a miracle. Thousands and thousands of hornets come out of the forest and attack the invading army. And so now the soldiers take this as a huge sign, and they just leave. And the general says, okay, I can't force the hand of God.
Yes.
And they retreat and leave their country.
That is incredible.
So then my dear friend says, I know what I need to do now. So he goes out to the 50 elders and he says, let me tell you the story of our great-grandfather, again, which we all know well. One by one of those elders left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As they all left, a few months later, because it got out, who is this man who's bigger than attacking his enemies? He was, within a few months, elected to be the head. He became the head of all the heads of tribes in his nation.
Wow.
So he got a much more powerful position. And a few months after that, his nation, while most senators are elected from the people, the government can appoint like 5 senior senators. And one day he was called into Congress, kind of, why am I called here? And everyone stands up and starts clapping and says, you have been nominated to be an honorary with all the privileges of a senator. And then he was appointed to be a consultant or be a part of 3 main, like the Ministry of International Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Internal Affairs, and different stuff like this.
It just goes to show what can happen when you are faithful to God. And even in difficult situations, when you rely upon God, how he was elevated into a position of even greater influence than he had before, because his decisions were based on answered prayer.
Exactly.
So how have you seen, because I have a feeling you've traveled a lot, you've met a lot of people, how have you seen God provide for his people?
Well, it happens in many ways. God provides internally, he provides externally as well, but I'd share one story of how I've seen God provide internally.
Okay.
The brother of this man that I was just sharing about, who got elevated, and he works with him as his second or deputy director. Their country was going through extreme drought. It's in a Sahara region. Here back a few years ago. And he got this just deep sensation, because they run several tractors as a business that run nonstop. And he got this sensation, bring your tractors and dig out a great big reservoir, a pond. But Lord, this is stupid. People are going to laugh at me. Why am I? It's going to cost a lot of money, because, you know, to dig out a big pond like they do in the West, you know, like out when I was a kid in New Mexico, farmers would dig out these big ponds. He felt really foolish about it, but he kept feeling, dig out this big pond. So he digs out this big pond, several acres, and he's feeling super foolish. It's drought, there's no rain. But he just said, I need to follow this. It was so overwhelming. So he digs out this big pond, feeling kind of foolish, because he did it at kind of the original town where their tribe came from, where their grandfather moved 450 years ago. This little town, and he digs this big thing, people thinking, our big tribal chief, or the brother of the tribal chief, is kind of nuts. What is he doing? And they all knew he was a follower of Jesus, and he says that, well, this is just what I feel God telling me to do. Well, after the whole pond's been dug out and all prepared and fixed, someone early in the morning comes and wakes him up. He's gone to bed feeling kind of foolish, stupid about the whole thing. He's woken up in the morning. Someone says, come and say, you were right, you were right. And a kid pulls him out. He looks, the pond's full of water.
Wow.
And there's not just one person there, the whole village, the whole town's out looking.
Wow.
Because not only is there water, but there's fish in the water and different varieties of fish.
Wow.
So as God provided fish to Peter and his nets full of fish, the people who had been in drought with no water and no food because they couldn't farm were provided with water and fish to eat.
Yes.
And today that village, who used to question how is it that our chiefs became followers of Jesus, they says, wow, we want to be a part of this Jesus as well.
Wow, what a witness. What?
So God, we see all kinds of stuff that happen. Big part of support of the ministry as well are donations that people give to support. We have about, as we mentioned earlier, about 400 people on payroll.
Okay.
Some of these are paid from local tithes and offerings where we have permission from the local church entities to keep these tithes and offerings, as well as from generous donations of donors who send money to help finance work, to open work in new countries. For example, I received a phone call here not too long ago, a few months ago, where would be a new country that we could support. So I think he's a doctor, and he gave a donation to start work. And there's many people who give just a monthly small donation that help keep things operating.
Yeah, because it's a huge operation. This isn't a small operation.
No.
Yes, that requires a lot.
Yes.
For sure. What are some stories where you've seen people's lives transformed?
Yes. I'll tell you a story of I've just seen, people doing things very differently. One of my friends that I work with carefully, that he's also a big leader from a different area. His family had been religious leaders in their nation. And he actually came from Sabbath keeping, a Sabbath observant religious group, Muslim. But interestingly, there's maybe 10 to 15 million Sabbath observant people in his nation.
Wow.
And as he has started a Sabbath keeping, a Bible believing, Jesus following movement among the followers of his own father, who his own father's become a follower of Jesus, and really embraced how can we take Jesus to my people. One day, the person that I work with receives a phone call. Someone several spiritual generations away down in a little village, and they'd given him the phone number of the big chief, and he says, I got a big problem, what do I do? And my friend asked him, well, what's your problem? He says, I'm a papaya farmer. And once I became a follower of Jesus, everyone in the village has ostracized me. But the worst thing, my business is destroyed because every time a papaya is ready in my orchard, someone steals the papaya.
Wow.
So I no longer have papayas to sell. What do I do as a follower of Christ? And my friend, he thinks, man, what do you do if everyone's revenging in the place? And he says, well, let's just pray together, brother. So he starts praying with him, and as he's praying, he just like it comes to his memory or to flash a papaya cut in half, a beautiful ripe papaya. And he sees these seeds in his mind's eye of all these papaya seeds. So he asked the farmer, what's inside a papaya when their prayer closes? And he says, they're full of seeds. And so then he doesn't know why, but he asks him, how many people are in your village? Or how many families? He says, well, we live in an outskirts of a little village, and there's 50 families. And the thieving is happening, I think, from a lot of these 50 families.
Wow.
They have all kind of, because it's too many papayas for one family. And so the whole village has to be involved in the theft of my papayas. He says, okay, well, that's what we need to do. He says, how many papaya seeds do you usually plant together to get one sapling? He says, usually 3 to 4, up to 5 little papaya seeds you plant together, and then you trim it and take the strongest. He says, well, why don't you do that? And he says, why don't you plant get 500 saplings together, and then take 10 saplings to each one of the 50 families? He says, well, I know that's the Jesus way, but to take it now to my enemies, do I really want to do that? And he says, let's pray together. So they pray again, and he gets convicted. So he immediately goes, gets 2, 3 papayas, takes the papaya seeds, he gets all these saplings together, and they kind of grow fast in the tropics due to the weather, and so they grow up quick, and once they're about, less than a foot high and grown up, he takes 10 to each one of the 50 families. As he takes each one of those to the families are shocked.
Yes, I would be too. I'm shocked listening to this story.
And so one by one in each one of the families, then as he takes them, he says, I've come to gift you papayas. I believe that you like papayas. Because even he was first thinking, this is going to hurt my business. You know,
Yes.
they're all going to have papayas now
Yes.
too. But most of his papayas were sold to market outside of his village. So as he went around, all of them one by one started apologizing. You know, we weren't very nice. We're so sorry we're snitching your papayas. You're so kind. So he calls back to my friend, you can't believe what has happened. Everything has changed. They've all apologized.
Yeah.
We're all friends again now. And he says, well, now use this opportunity to teach them how to grow papayas. And every time you go back, you go and train them. This is what you do. This is how you do it. And then they can help you grow papayas. Well, to make a long story short, not only have most of those 50 families over the last 18 months come to Christ, many of those are now growing papayas, and his market for the papaya business has even gotten bigger because he buys from them and resells in the bigger town.
Wow, that is incredible. That is incredible. He was giving papayas to the very people that were stealing his papayas
Exactly.
in the first place, and then those people ended up following Christ.
Yes.
Wow.
So this is what we see. We see these lives really transformed by the gospel to saying, how can I follow Jesus? Whether it's a simple papaya farmer or a person who has power to declare war.
Yes.
We've seen them question, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? What would he do if he were in my shoes here?
Yes. Yeah.
And that has been the exciting thing for me to see among Muslims, among Hindus. Another story of a transformed life. One of my big national leaders that he oversees 5 countries. He was traveling in a city quite a ways from where he lives. And this is in India. And as he was traveling to this distant city, all of a sudden someone started calling his name. And he looks over, and it was an old buddy from university, a drinking buddy, you might say.
Okay.
And even though he came from a Brahmin family, and even though they're supposed to be conservative and all this, he lived a wild life while he was in university.
Okay.
So his friend, he was his good friend, he hadn't seen him in a long time, and he says, come to my house. He was just going into his hotel. Get your stuff from the hotel and come to my house. So he gets his things from his hotel, goes to the house of his friend, and is there talking and eating at lunchtime. Then he wants to drink. He says, I don't drink any longer, I'm so sorry. And he says, how are you going to do it? He had become very, very wealthy since the time they were in school.
Okay.
And had the best, most expensive liquors, you know, like open up $1,000 thing. He says, I really can't drink. So he leaves. He's a bit unhappy that his old drinking partner doesn't want to drink now. And he had just come out with this very expensive liquor that he had opened up. And he kind of goes off in a huff, but then his wife opens up, you know what? How did you overcome alcohol? Because they were doing more than just alcohol. Says, my husband never overcame, and it's just about destroyed our life, because she had been a part of their friend group.
Wow.
And is there anything that you could do to help my husband? He says, really, it's not me. And he points to heaven.
Amen.
And he says, it's the God of heaven that gave me the power to overcome the dissipated life, and now I've given my life to help others. You have to help my husband. And she lowers, so he got
Yeah.
So, and then he shares with her quite a while he had to go back to work. And she gets all excited. So he comes back, and she starts to share, husband, you need to hear what our old friend has to share about. And he got really angry, and my friend had to go back to his hotel. He was no longer welcome to stay there. We don't want to hear about it. He wasn't ready to change, and he didn't want to hear about Jesus or anything.
Yeah.
So he says, it's fine. He went back to his hotel. I'm not going to fight here. And so she wouldn't let go of her husband. And all night she kept saying, you know, we really need to change. I'm willing to change. You need to change. But I think this gives us hope if he could change.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that night they fussed most of the night, and she finally goes to bed, sleeping in the chair. He goes to bed, but then they both had like dreams or visions that night.
Wow.
And before he had gone to sleep, my friend had left him a little small Bible, and he had got angry and thrown the Bible across the room, and it was on the floor. And he got this dream that was not a good thing to do, to throw God's word on the floor. And so he was freaked out. And she had had a dream that he had to go back and bring my friend back to the home, and they had to listen to the message of that book he had thrown on the floor.
Wow.
So he went back early in the morning. I'm so sorry, I did you bad.
Yeah.
And he brought him back home. And then he said, you're going to stay here. We need to know everything. I agree. I have to change my life.
Wow. Praise the Lord that he came to that realization that it was time for a change.
It was.
It was. Our time is just rapidly escaping us. What are some of the needs of nPraxis International?
So we have, every month we have requests to open work in new areas. It costs us an average of about $150 per worker.
Okay.
That's a big need, and we're always trying to open in new areas, expand into the existing places, and the purchase of Bibles.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's like we were saying earlier, that's no small operation to reach that many people with the gospel.
Yes.
Around the world. Absolutely, absolutely. So what about volunteers?
And so also we have volunteers that help us with different things, answering phones. We don't really have an office. We work from our own homes.
Okay.
But we have places for volunteers, for donations, for Bibles, and stipend workers.
Okay, okay. Well, we are going to go to a brief address roll and news break so you know how you can get in contact with nPraxis International, and we will be right back.
Unprecedented numbers of people groups from many nations are finding the fullest expression of their identity in following Jesus, and nPraxis International is making that possible. For more information on how you can sponsor workers in Muslim, Hindu, and tribal groups, their Bibles for Peace project, or their media programs, visit their website npraxisinternational.org. That's the letter N, praxisinternational.org. You may also call them at 844-668-2000 or write to them at nPraxis International, 9312 Janine Lane, Ottawa, Tennessee, 37363.
Wow, where has the time gone? This is coming to a close. What are some final thoughts that you have?
Well, you know, it's burning in my heart to reach the unreached. And it starts, you know, Jesus says, start here in Judea, go to Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And my big challenge to people would be, who has God put in your path? Your own grandkid at home, a work colleague, a neighbor across the street. Who is that person of peace around you, and who has God put close to you?
Yes.
Whether it's to help a foreign mission like ours or another one, or is it to just reach across and how can I bring my grandkid back to church?
Yeah, yeah. How would you recommend somebody go about finding the calling that God's placed on their life?
Well, God, in my case, revealed it step by step, slowly. It didn't happen immediately, but I kept praying over about a 2-3 year period, what do you want me to do, Lord? And it happened to me, you know, I did this big round the world trip, $10 a day or $1 a day, I don't know, for months. And I was caught in no man's land between Hong Kong and China.
Wow.
I was cold, all wet, and I heard this strong call, Marty, follow me to reach the unreached. And then God put on my heart to work for Muslims.
Yes.
But what I think it's just asking God, what do you put in my hands? And something I learned from some very good Mennonite friends of mine is when they're asked that question, what does God put in your hands? What are your talents? What are your gifts? What do you enjoy doing? What does your family do? What resources do you have? And then that kind of starts to close down and show you what to do.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Brother Marty.
Thank you.
For
Such
sharing.
a pleasure to be here with you,
Yes, sir.
Jason.
Thank you for joining us. Join us next time. God bless.